I always believed that a mother's lap was the safest place in the world. That quiet comfort, the way her fingers moved gently through my hair, the soft rhythm of her breathing, it used to feel like home. Until that one evening when everything changed. That night, I fell asleep on my mother's lap like I had 100 times before, but something felt different. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in a quiet discomfort that made my stomach twist. I was 17 then, old enough to sense when something wasn't right, but still too young to fully understand the weight of what was unfolding around me. It was a rainy Sunday evening. The kind where the sky stays gray all day and the only warmth is inside the house. Dad was working late again. He'd been doing that a lot lately. Mom and I were watching an old movie in the living room, the kind she always said reminded her of simpler times. I must have dozed off somewhere in the middle. Her arms were around me, and for a while, I felt safe. But then I remember waking up, just barely. Half awake, eyes still closed, I felt her shift under me. Not the usual way she moved when trying to get comfortable, but something else. Her breathing changed. The air around us changed. There was a whisper, too soft to make out, but not meant for me. It wasn't directed at me. I remember the sound of a phone being quickly tucked away, the slight jerk in her body like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep, but everything inside me was suddenly wide awake. My heart raced, and a lump formed in my throat that I couldn't swallow. I didn't know what I had just felt, but I knew it was something I wasn't supposed to. Mom kissed my forehead like she always did. But even that felt strange, like it carried something hidden behind it. Something heavy. Something that didn't belong in a mother's love. I stayed still, letting her think I was asleep, while my mind tried to put the pieces together. It wasn't just a moment, it was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would slowly unravel the truth I had been too blind to see. Over the next few days, little things started to stand out. Phone calls she took in whispers. The way she smiled at messages she never let me see. The way she suddenly cared too much about how she looked, even if we were just staying in. I started to notice patterns, things I had ignored before, thinking they were just coincidences. But deep down, I knew they weren't. Something was happening behind closed doors, and I had just brushed the surface of it by accident. What I didn't know back then was that falling asleep on her lap that night would open a door I could never close again. A door to secrets, betrayal, and a truth that would change how I saw my mother forever. And what I discovered next, that's the part that still haunts me. The next morning, everything looked normal, almost too normal. Mom made her usual breakfast, humming softly while flipping pancakes, just like she always did on Mondays. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Her smile felt practiced, like she was trying too hard to seem calm. I watched her closely, studying the way she avoided eye contact whenever I spoke. It was small things, but once your eyes are open to something, you can't unsee it. At school, I kept replaying that moment in my head, falling asleep on her lap, the sudden tension in her body, that whisper meant for someone else. Was it just my imagination? Or had I accidentally uncovered a part of her life that was never meant for me to know? That question stayed with me, following me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I didn't tell anyone. Not my best friend. Not even my journal. I kept it buried, trying to act normal, even though every moment felt heavier than the last. That weekend, Dad came home early, something he rarely did. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes distant. He hugged Mom quickly, but their usual warmth was gone. I watched the way they spoke to each other. Polite, even kind, but distant, like two people trying to remember how to be close again. I noticed how Mom's phone never left her side, always face down, as if she was hiding something behind that black screen. She smiled when she texted, but the smile never reached her eyes. I started to remember things from months before. Times when Mom would suddenly leave the house for groceries and come back 2 hours later with barely a bag in hand. The way she'd once lied about going to see a friend, only for me to spot that same friend at the mall while I was out. At the time, I brushed it off. But now it all started to feel connected. Late one night, I passed by her room and heard her talking softly on the phone. Her voice was low, almost nervous. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding, trying to catch every word. I couldn't hear much, just the tone. Gentle. Intimate. Not the way someone talks to a friend. Not the way she talks to Dad. I knew something was happening. Something that would break everything if it came out. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. And I was about to find out just how deep it really went. A few days later, I found the courage to look through Mom's phone, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. She had stepped out to water the plants in the backyard, and the phone was left charging on the kitchen counter. My hands shook as I picked it up. The screen was locked, but the notification preview showed a message from someone named L. It read, "Last night was perfect. I keep thinking about your smile." My stomach dropped. That message wasn't meant for a friend. It wasn't innocent. And it definitely wasn't for my father. Before I could see more, she walked back in. I quickly put the phone down and pretended to be looking for snacks in the cupboard. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on me for a second too long, like she sensed I knew something. The silence that followed felt louder than anything else. From that day, I started noticing more clues. The way she kept her distance from Dad. The way she seemed distracted at dinner, smiling at her phone when she thought no one was watching. I tried to act like nothing had changed, but inside I was battling a storm of confusion, anger, and sadness. How could someone I trusted so deeply, someone who raised me, be hiding such a big secret? At school, my grades started slipping. My mind was never fully present. I avoided my friends, skipped lunch, and stayed in the library to avoid small talk. My best friend, Amia, finally cornered me one day and asked what was going on. I wanted to tell her. I really did. But how do you explain something you barely understand yourself? How do you say, "I think my mom is being unfaithful," when the words feel too heavy to speak? Meanwhile, Dad was drifting further away. He barely looked up from his laptop when I came home. He was either working late or locked in his study. It felt like we were three strangers living under one roof, each hiding something from the other. No one said it out loud, but the walls were filled with secrets. Then one afternoon, I saw her get into a car I didn't recognize. She looked around before stepping in, as if she was making sure no one saw her. But I did. And it was in that moment I realized the truth was much darker than I had imagined. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I was about to uncover. I watched from across the street as the car pulled away with Mom inside. My heart was racing, my hands clammy as I crouched behind a parked SUV. I had followed her on instinct, telling Dad I was headed to the library. In reality, I was just trying to understand what was happening to our family. I didn't know what I expected to find, but seeing her willingly get into that car with a man I didn't recognize hit harder than I imagined. There was no confusion anymore. No space left for doubt. The car drove toward the edge of town, toward a quiet neighborhood filled with small cafes and quiet streets where no one would recognize her. I borrowed Mia's bike the next day and made the same trip, hoping I'd catch a glimpse of something, anything, that could help me make sense of what I'd seen. And I did. Tucked inside a corner cafe with dim lights and soft music, I saw them. Mom and that man, sitting close, laughing quietly, like they shared a world that didn't include us. Her hand rested on his for a moment too long. My chest tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The betrayal burned quietly, like a flame I couldn't put out. At home, I acted normal. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. But every moment we spent together felt fake now. When she asked how my day was, I wanted to scream. When she hugged me goodnight, I had to stop myself from pulling away. And worst of all, Dad didn't notice. He still kissed her goodbye before leaving for work, still trusted her completely, while she lived this hidden life right under his nose. I started documenting things. Texts I glanced at. Places she went. Times she left and returned. I didn't know what I was doing or why I was doing it. Maybe I thought I needed proof. Or maybe I just needed to feel some control over a truth that was slowly eating away at everything I believed in. But the more I uncovered, the more tangled it all became. And then one night, everything almost came crashing down. I woke up to voices, Mom and Dad arguing in the hallway. I couldn't hear what it was about, but her voice cracked, and his sounded colder than I'd ever heard. I tiptoed closer, heart pounding. And then I heard it. One sentence that changed everything. Dad said, "I know." But what exactly did he know? And how long had he known it? That moment was the beginning of everything falling apart, and I was right in the middle of it. I froze in the hallway, barely breathing. My father's voice echoed in my ears, "I know." For a moment, the house felt too quiet. No more arguing. Just a heavy silence, thick enough to choke on. I stepped back, slowly returning to my room, my mind spinning. What exactly did he know? Had he found out the same way I had? Or had he known all along and just pretended for the sake of holding our family together? The next morning at breakfast, everything looked normal again. Mom moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened. Dad sat at the table, reading the newspaper, his face calm, but distant. I wanted to scream at both of them, but I just sat there, stirring my cereal, pretending to. The silence between them was no longer subtle. It was loud. Tense. The kind you feel in your bones. Later that evening, when Dad asked me to sit down in the living room, I thought he was going to tell me everything. My palms were sweating, heart racing, but instead, he said something that completely threw me off. "You've noticed, haven't you?" he asked quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. I nodded, slowly. He looked up and gave a sad, tired smile. "I've known for a while," he continued. "But I didn't want you to get caught in it." He told me that things between them had started falling apart years ago. That they had both stopped trying, but neither wanted to admit it. He had suspected there was someone else, but he never confronted her. He just buried himself in work and silence. "Sometimes," he said, "we lie to ourselves because it's easier than facing the truth." I didn't know what to say. Hearing him say it out loud made it feel even more real, like there was no turning back. But before I could respond, Mom walked in, holding a small envelope in her hand. Her face was pale, eyes red. She looked at Dad, then at me, and said, "We need to talk." She sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a printed photo. It was her and the man from the cafe, but it wasn't recent. It was from over 20 years ago. She handed it to me and said, "His name is Luke. He was my first love, before your father. I never stopped talking to him. We lost touch, but after your grandmother passed away, I found one of his letters while going through old boxes. I wrote him back." Dad leaned forward. "You didn't tell her the rest?" he asked quietly. Mom looked at me and finally said what no one expected. "Luke is your father's brother." I stared at her, the words not making sense at first. My mind struggled to catch up. All this time, it hadn't just been an affair. It was a betrayal on a whole different level. Family. Blood. Trust. Everything twisted in a way I never saw coming. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just my mother's story or my father's. It was mine too. Because some betrayals don't just break homes. They break identities. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat there, holding that old photo, my hands trembling. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. The betrayal wasn't just emotional now, it was personal. My mom had been hiding something so deep, so tangled, that it didn't just tear her marriage apart. It tore through the foundation of our entire family. And the worst part was, I could see in her eyes that she wasn't proud of any of it. She looked broken, like someone who had been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. Dad didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stood up, walked into his study, and closed the door behind him. That silence hit harder than any outburst ever could. Mom stayed seated, quietly wiping her tears, while I sat there staring at the photo like it held all the answers. But it didn't. It only raised more questions I didn't know how to ask. What was love supposed to look like? Was it sacrifice? Was it truth? Or was it just surviving day to day while hiding parts of yourself? Over the next few days, everything changed. My dad moved into the guest room, and I started spending more time outside just to get away from the tension inside the house. My mom tried to talk to me, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed space to breathe, to feel, to figure out what all this meant for me. It's strange how one moment of truth can shift your entire world. All from falling asleep on my mother's lap. That small, innocent moment had pulled back a curtain I didn't even know was there. Eventually, Mom sat me down again, this time without tears, without excuses. She said, what I did was wrong. Not just to your dad, but to you. I should have ended things before they got this far. I just wanted to feel something again. And I went about it the wrong way. It wasn't an apology wrapped in guilt. It was raw and honest. And somehow, that made it easier to listen. I didn't forgive her immediately. But I started to understand her. And maybe that's the first step to healing. Dad and I had our own quiet conversation weeks later. He told me he wasn't angry anymore, just tired. He said people make mistakes, even the ones we love most. But it's what they do after the mistake that defines who they really are. He hadn't decided what he'd do about the marriage yet, but he promised one thing, that he wouldn't let it affect his relationship with me. Now, months later, our home isn't perfect. The laughter isn't as loud, and dinners are sometimes quiet. But there's honesty now. No more pretending. No more secrets. And maybe, in a strange way, that's a kind of peace. This story isn't just about infidelity. It's about the cracks we hide, the pain we carry, and the strength it takes to face the truth. Because sometimes, the most painful discoveries are the ones that finally set us free. 56.